incident was about to take place that would shake the foundations of the civilized world.
It is time to open your mind. Time to discover your divine self as we navigate this holographic matrix together. Strap in, Cosmic Family, as we slide through this wormhole of cosmic information together in search of the truth. The truth.
You can't handle the truth.
It's time to go inside the matrix.
Inside the matrix.
With your host, Jimmy Brent.
All right, everybody, welcome to Inside the Matrix. I hope that each and every one of you is able to maintain in these incredible, ridiculous, absurd times that we find ourselves in. Anyway, my guest today is Dr. David Martin. He's a businessman, professor, author, storyteller, inventor, oracle, father, friend, and creator of the MCAM CNBC IQ 100 Index. He specializes in putting humanity back into humans and business. By creating real transformation from the inside out, David shows and teaches people how to be the difference that makes the difference. David's secret of success globally is the Wobble Effect. He says the problem we see superficially is not the problem. He shows us how to identify the real issues and access our innate wisdom. His first invention was a laser-integrated system to target and treat inoperable tumors. His mathematics helped unravel the way the human body processes hormones and led to the detection and treatment of many diseases. His observation of human behavior led to his development of technology which deciphers the intention and motivation of communication, a technology that has impacted and saved the lives of billions. His global business activities served to develop the world's top-performing global equity index, including the CNBC IQ 100, powered by MCAM. He's brought the world's largest white-collar criminals to justice and brought the world's most oppressed and disenfranchised transformative ways to engage. From the starry expanses of Mongolia to the flashing lights of New York, his work is passion-filled, whether it's with a camel herder or a global CEO. David, welcome to the show.
Jimmy, it's wonderful to be with you. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. I was so incredibly inspired by your videos, and I know so many people have seen, especially the last one you did, where you included all the backup documentation and the template letter that people could use to write to their lawmakers or anybody that's in their purview, sort of in a legal sense that's infringing upon their constitutional rights. And as a thought leader out there, I really respect what you're doing, and I think it's just wonderful.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
So every time I have a guest on the show, I always start with, I like for our audience to know a little bit more about you, your background, kind of where you were raised, how you were raised, what your family was like, how you developed into the man that you are today. You can share as much or as little as you like.
Well, that's a long conversation, and I'll keep it short.
Okay.
My family, the Martin family, has been in the United States since the 1730s. My ancestor, David Martin, I am the 14th generation in America, but my ancestor, David Martin, came to Pennsylvania, to the port of Philadelphia, on the ship Molly in the 1730s, and began farming in what is now Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. And for most of our family history on that side, my dad's side of the family, my family has been very involved with the very conservative religious group, the Mennonite Church. So I had kind of that half of my background. My mother's family was very well-to-do and very wired into the establishment of Washington, D.C. You couldn't get kind of further from the conservative Mennonite Lancaster County than kind of the glitz of the legal community and the kind of establishment community in which my mother's father operated. And I am the unfortunate merger of my father, an astrophysicist, and my mother, a classic linguist. I am the reason why you shouldn't clone people like me. It's a funny thing because, you know, my early childhood was spent. I was born in Fargo, North Dakota, but didn't spend much time there. Grew up in Southern California during the 1960s and 70s. At the time, my parents were very involved in the peace movement in the Southern California scene. So very, very active in the Vietnam War movement. And then in 1977, we moved to southeastern Pennsylvania, back to my dad's kind of ancestral home. And I spent my high school milking cows and working on a farm and harvesting wheat and thrashing it with horse-drawn power. And, you know, I think I'm the only person I've ever met who knows which end of a cow to really milk by hand, and also kind of run the most successful equity trading and quant trading strategies on the planet. I don't think that there are many of us out.
It's a rare combo.
But your question's a good one, because I have to say that my herited values, which were the values of integrity, the values of exceptionally hard work, the values of being capable of standing alone for things that you find compelling, is something that's, you know, part and parcel of the values of the communities that I grew up in. Having a grandfather who argued cases in the Supreme Court of the United States, and always wanted to make sure that I understood, respected, and ultimately studied the law. You merge those worlds together, and what you get is somebody who, for the last 30 years of my corporate work, after I left my formal involvement in academia at the University of Virginia, my corporate activities have always found me in the midst of uncovering the truth that set large groups into emancipated states when they didn't even know they were potentially enslaved. And that's something that I have done, you know, so frequently that this, unfortunately, is not my first rodeo. And I would love to say it's my last, but I'm sure it won't be.
Right. And, you know, the way you operated in the corporate world is rare indeed, because most people at those levels are just focused on materialism, their egos, and, you know, their mighty power and control, their country club life, and all those kinds of ego-based things. So you're definitely an anomaly in that world.
Well, you know, it's easy for us in many instances to critique the worlds that we're not a part of. And what I found to be compelling in my life is the model that comes out of the kind of 13th and 14th century, which was the model of the way guilds worked and mastery was done. My view is that if you're going to critique a system, you better show me that you've put the effort in to really understand it. I think it's very easy to sit on the outside and throw stones and talk about what should be done. I think it's much more interesting and far more integrity-filled to respect a system, even if it is corrupt, to the point of understanding it, mastering it, and proving your mastery in it. And I think that's one of the things that I really am passionate about, because you know, we can all look at, as I've said many times before, we can all look at the current system and say, man, it's really not working very well for the majority of people. But we fail to understand that the system is working precisely as it was architected for and by the few people for whom it's working. And so when we critique a system, we really need to understand how it works. We need to get inside to use your brand, get inside the matrix, understand the work. And once we can show that we've mastered it and beat it at its own, I think then we're given the opportunity to be qualified to comment on a model that might be better and might serve humanity in a much more beneficial way. And so I am deeply committed to making sure that level of integrity is part of everything that we do.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I agree that it's definitely something that has to be dissected to really understand. And you've actually gone into the system, and like you said, you've mastered it to a high degree, which most of us had never done. But nonetheless, we can see where this is a closed-end system for the most part.
Yeah.
It is by the so-called elite for the elite, and there's really no intention to make it other than that.
That's correct.
But these same people are affecting our lives in a very negative way. Now you can throw that back and say, hey, you people are responsible, for not allowing this to happen. It's a point that's well taken, because we can decide with what we buy, what we spend our money on, what we put our attention on, what's important and what's not important. But I think that what's happened is there's been a deliberate attempt to dumb people down.
That's right.
To partially poison people to the point where they don't function well. They're not educated in the systems of critical thinking. And so therefore, we find a populace that's very unwilling and unable to really get into the system and dissect it and conquer it and, create something better out of it, when most people are busy just trying to survive a system like this.
And I think that your concern, and I couldn't agree more vigorously, your concern with the fact that, and I use the terminology, I know it's not necessarily popular, but I feel that there has been what I refer to as a hybridization of humanity, which is a systematic alteration in the way in which we are told to learn, the way in which we are told to assimilate information, the sources and methods we're used to access information. All of these things are placed into an ever narrowing set of variables that unfortunately only trigger reflex. They don't trigger considered thought. Something as simple as the Facebook thumb up, thumb down, right? That has the social evolution of the Colosseum of Rome. Mm-hmm. Not a thoughtful thing to do. There's no benefit to the like-dislike as a digital phenomenon, because the fact is, what it does is it cheapens the depth of the nuance of perspective. I may vigorously disagree with you on numerous points, but I can always learn from you if I keep an open mind and I enter into dialogue. But in a digital world of like-dislike, thumb up, thumb down, that kind of thoughtful engagement is actually being explicitly extracted from our social discourse, and we are the worse for it.
Absolutely. And as it's designed, of course, to be that way, and it's designed to be a habit-forming, dopamine-inducing, time-wasting system on one hand, but it's also a double-edged sword for those who designed it. We know that it was originally funded by DARPA, all of the social media platforms, as an intelligence-gathering tool, particularly for AI, social engineering. But it's also, in respect to being a double-edged sword, it's a platform that we've been able to communicate with people that we never had the ability to communicate with before on a massive level. Now, there's all kinds of misdirection, misinformation, disinformation. So one has to successfully navigate through all of that, or at least try to. And over time, I think that's quite possible once people become informed as to what's happening in our world. But the point is that we do have these platforms that we can use somewhat successfully, even though now we're seeing much more censorship. Censorship is the reaction to an awakening populace, which is in fact a good thing in my opinion.
Well, and your observations about the degree to which, and once again, it's a refrain of mine, free is never free. When we think of social media, when we think of information access through search engines, when we think of any of these things as a zero-cost reality, we delude ourselves. We have to constantly be reminded that there are individuals and organizations who have supported the development of and benefit from every form of social media. And when one says that it is, a free app, or it's a free this, or it's a free that, it masks the identity of the cost that is being extracted. and I think that it's critical for people to be deeply aware that free isn't, and that the inquiry into who is benefiting and what purpose is being served is actually a really critical question. And once again, something that, as I've talked about in the presentations I've made recently, is simply an inquiry that people are not making.
Yeah, or at least not enough people are making it at this point. But I'm really excited to see that many sheriffs around the country are saying, no, we're not going to enforce this incredible infringement upon constitutional rights.
Yeah.
My friend, Sheriff Richard Mack from the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association is a leader in that. And he's been reaching out to a lot of sheriffs himself. And I love seeing things like that, because that is truly where they need to be. And that's the type of action they need to take on our behalf. They are the last line of defense. The police and the military are the last line of defense for we the people constitutionally. Unfortunately, many of them are beholding to the federal government who for equipment, for financial support, for their own paychecks. And so they're afraid, to stand up to a system. Their morality takes a back seat to the political considerations that they find themselves in.
Well, and Jimmy, that's kind of where a lot of the work that I've been focused on is explicitly trying to uncover. The fact is that we have a system that is unfortunately held up as some form of objectivity, whether we talk about that in the public arena in public policy or politics, whether we talk about that in academics or sciences. But in the case of our current situation, there is absolutely no question that if you follow the money at all, you realize that the orchestration of the current events is 100% dependent on individuals who, while they will say at the end of their papers, have no financial interest in the research that they're doing. If you peel even a single half layer of the onion back, you find out that, and you don't even have to go into the onion, you can actually look straight through this onion, that the self-interest is both the individuals and the institutions with whom they're affiliated have gotten on essentially a public subsidy, where if you do not serve to reinforce the echo chamber of the official dogma, you're cut off from financing. And as a result, you're left in a situation where it is an existential threat. And academicians, scientists, are placed in a position by themselves and by their institution where they are prohibited from speaking the truth at risk of losing their very livelihoods. And this is absolutely a cancer that has infected the United States for the last 70 years with public financing through National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, more recently through things like DARPA, where the cash cow is the one that moves the loudest. And if you don't listen to that moo, if you don't follow that moo, you are cut off and you're sent to the abattoir.
Yeah, and there's definitely a bad case of moral relativism that a lot of these people suffer from, unfortunately. And it's sad to see, but money is ruling a lot of these institutions, and is actually the motivating factor behind what we're seeing today, this incredible overreach, and a very highly organized and well-coordinated system. And it seems to me that the so-called, whatever you want to call this organization of criminals that are trying to massively control the world into this one world government, one world order, whatever you want to call them. They are very highly organized, and they've been able to put a lot of they've been able to buy a lot of people in very authoritative positions to carry out what they've done. And you can see that this is not just in the United States, but this is a worldwide phenomenon, that they've been able to put people in place who will absolutely jump on the bandwagon when they, introduce this whole scamdemic thing.
Yeah. Well, and as we'll get to after the break, I think it's critical to get into the fact that while there are numerous people who have sold out, there are numerous people who have been complicit in this, the number of bad actors is actually a finite number. It is amazing to see how a few exceptionally corrupt individuals have been able to hijack the public narrative right around the globe.
Yep. Yeah, it is absolutely amazing. And it's all about the money. And people can easily be bought and sold on a sort of ideology where they themselves are going to be in a position to really benefit and really have a great life. And they really don't care much about everybody else. It's kind of like the silent weapons for quiet wars doctrine, where they refer to people as the useless eaters and the bewildered herd. Although that is somewhat accurate, it's definitely not something that is human in any way, shape, or form. So we're coming up against the break. David, we're going to take a short pause right here. Everybody stick around with us. If you have a question, pop it in the chat or give us a call. We'll be back in just a little bit with more interesting things to talk about. So hang in there. We'll be right back. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to Inside the Matrix with our special guest, Mr. David Martin. Now, before we went on the break, we were kind of touching on some of the players out there in this incredible overreach, and also the fact that a lot of the sheriffs out there, maybe not a lot, but quite a few of the sheriffs are standing up and recognizing their constitutional duties, which is a wonderful thing. And you pointed out in your really astute video, your last butterfly video, David, of how our civil rights, according to the Constitution, are being infringed, as well as some other laws that specifically prohibit the activity that's going on now. So would you like to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, Jimmy, I think it's critical for people to understand that the scenario that led us to this scenario, and that does sound like a bit of a wormhole, but it's important to realize that we have been pursuing this particular event horizon for over 17 years. When you go back to 2003, the SARS outbreak, which was, largely in Asia, it did get around to other parts of the world, but it was largely centered in Asia, gave rise to a number of initiatives that were both in response to the SARS outbreak in 2002 and 2003, but in many respects were not just in response to, but in fact very inextricably linked within a broader campaign around how to understand the virulence of all forms of viruses and bacterium that had both potential to be used as infectious agents for hostile purposes, and some people thought that they might be used for essentially harnessing the RNA of nature to build vectors for all sorts of vaccines, therapeutic things, etc. And so if we go back and we look at what happened in 2003, when the United States Center for Disease Control filed a patent illegally on a composition of nature, which was the patent that they filed on the coronavirus, that patent specifically made reference to the bridge between what was known to be animal-borne coronaviruses and this now new emerging phenomenon, according to the folks at CDC, that somehow or another this was the first time coronaviruses of the SARS nature, the one that caused the severe acute respiratory syndrome, that notion that a new coronavirus was out there and it had bridged from animals to humans was something that was patented by the Center for Disease Control. And, you know, since my video came out, Jimmy, I've had a number of people who take issue with how I've characterized it because they said it wasn't until 2013 when the Supreme Court ruled on the Myriad Genomics case and confirmed that you cannot patent nature and you cannot patent a virus. What unfortunately many of these individuals, and too many of them, by the way, are attorneys, don't realize is that the ruling by the Supreme Court in 2013 was actually confirming what was always the case. 35
Yes.
United States Code, Section 101 says it's illegal to patent nature.
Exactly.
Therefore, what CDC did was actually illegal in 2003 and was confirmed to be illegal in 2013. The crux of the issue about where we are today, however, falls in this period that's quite problematic from 2013 to 2016. And the reason why that time period is very problematic is made reference to in my video, but I just want to add for your listeners that during the response to the Middle East outbreak of coronavirus, what was called MERS, a group of researchers, including Dr. Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Dr. Anthony Fauci of the NIAID, made a public statement in which one of their research collaborators commented on the unfortunate nature of the fact that coronavirus outbreaks don't last long enough to get funded very well. Now, that's actually published. I'm going to be making that reference available in my presentation tomorrow. But interestingly enough, you hear them talk about the nearly pornographic obsession with not enough people died, not enough people got sick, and we really need to have a situation where the gravity of coronavirus can be made visible. And it was around that period of time where, as we all now know through the information that has been reported on through a number of sources, all directly coming from Center for Disease Control, National Institutes of Health, and NIAID, that we know that while in 2013 and 2014, the Obama administration was deeply concerned with the ethics and morality of what was going on for fear of the weaponization of what was called gain-of-function research, at no point did the researchers who are currently the architects of what is the current alleged pandemic, at no point did they stop their research. And I think that most of your viewers would be shocked to know that the organization that is responsible within the World Health Organization for declaring a virus a new virus, which is a coronavirus task group, includes, and I know you're going to be shocked, none other than Ralph Barrick, the guy who is not only heavily funded by NIAID and collaborates with Dr. Fauci routinely, but more problematically, despite all of the absolute falsehoods that he puts in his papers, has a financial interest in the form of patents that he holds and that the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill holds on both therapeutic interventions that are now being fast-tracked through the FDA. So the remdesivir and the EIDD2, I think it's 2008, the two experimental compounds that were developed largely for Ebola and in some cases in response to MERS, are now being promoted as the potential miracle cures for what might be the way to treat what's called SARS-CoV-2. But the problem that you have is if you go back and you look at the February 2nd publication in which SARS-CoV-2 was designated a unique and novel virus, you'll find that the committee that made that determination did something that they themselves report to be unprecedented. And this is in their write-up. So this is, taking it right out of the horse's mouth, or the camel's mouth, or in this case, the bat's mouth.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that the phylogenetic tree, and that's a big word, so let's just stop and unpack it. Phylogenetic tree is when you look at the RNA sequence of a virus and you look at the mutations and variations of the virus, the phylogenetic tree that was allegedly singled out as SARS-CoV-2 by the 2nd of February already had 4 documented highly different strains emerge, which would suggest that to say that we had a virus causing a disease was unlikely, because we had multiple experiences of multiple variants of coronavirus. And most of your listeners probably don't know this. But if you go into the actual list of the species of coronaviruses, right now we have 46, right? We have 46 coronaviruses that have made it all the way to official species level distinction. And if you go back further, you find that by the 2nd of February, we had 229 mutations of the one that was allegedly the singular SARS-CoV-2 in December 31st. Now, your listeners, me, you, and anybody with a brain knows that it is beyond credulity to suggest that in the space of 4 weeks, we suddenly had 229 different phylogenetic mutations of a thing that had only been around for a couple weeks. What that tells us, and by the way, let me just make the additional point. The co-conspirators I identify in the video, the CDC, the NIAID, UNC Chapel Hill, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, if you look at their funded research going back to 2016, already know that the mechanisms whereby coronavirus can apparently access the endosomal cell structure is through 2 receptor binding domains, both of which are common across many of those 46 coronaviruses. And for people to have made statements, and you'll recall this is a different virus. We know it's going to be much more virulent. We know it's going to be much more nasty. That statement could not have been made on the 2nd of February when we allegedly identified a singular virus. And back to my opening, what happened in a very bizarre and unprecedented way was the committee spent several paragraphs of their distinguishing between COVID-19, the clinical presentation of pneumonia, and infection based on SARS corona. Important is people have to realize that we were already in the midst of an atypical pneumonia. We had a very bizarre form of pneumonia that was quite prevalent around the world, by the way, which had exceptionally harsh conditions for the people who were worst impacted, with very painful lung problems, exceptionally difficult pneumonia symptoms, in some cases, significant problems with oxygen exchange into their bloodstream. What we know is that the distinction between COVID-19 and the coronavirus was absolutely essential, because somewhere between 80 and 85% of the people presenting with the clinical symptoms of this atypical pneumonia did not have, and to this day do not have, a positive test for SARS-CoV-2. Now, I just got done telling you there are 46 established coronaviruses already identified as the species of coronavirus. Of those, we have 229 mutations into 3 different classified types, type A, B, and C, on the SARS-CoV-2. And what is important to get from all of this is not only was this scandal in the naming convention to create the pandemic, but it is absolutely the case that every single person from February 2nd forward knows that there would be no way to build a viral interception through the form of a vaccine. There would be no way to do it when the mutations on this particular set of viruses are happening as basically as frequently as people sequence them. You know, if you can get 229 in a month, by now we're actually over several thousand.
Yeah, exactly.
So we already struggle with influenza vaccines, where when they come up with one, you know, it's only as good as last year's sample of the flu. The idea that you can somehow get in front of coronavirus, which is mutating at a rate that defies anybody's model, means A, that it is not the pandemic causing agent that it was promoted to be, and B, one would be suspect in ascribing any value to either the virus's uniqueness or the pandemic, because the people making the decision to call it a pandemic in late January and early February were financially incentivized because they own the patents on the therapy for what they were trying to scare the world into believing existed.
Exactly. It's a marketing ploy, and it's amazing. But it works into a whole bunch of other benefits for those who want to bring about this new world order, global government, whatever you want to call it, communism, socialism, you know, all the isms. It still fits their agenda very much to scare the crap out of people and get them to, you know, alter their behavior in such a drastic way. But definitely the money is what these guys are after. I mean, Gates has spilled the beans on himself, you know, talking about how we must have this vaccine, we're going to develop it, and the world cannot go back to normal for at least 18 months till we have this vaccine. And he's the one that's backing all the research. He's the one who's heavily invested in all the companies that are supposedly going to come out with this vaccine. These people tell on themselves, but yet they're still being paraded out because there are enough people in place with no integrity or who have bought into this, you know, ideology, which will in turn benefit them, that they're going to promote this whole thing in a big way. Obviously, vaccines, you know I know I have studied. I actually went years and years ago when my daughter was about to be born, and I started researching vaccines. I started reading actual vaccine reports and research. And if you read their own research, it tells you the vaccines do not work. And so with that in mind, you understand that there's a different agenda going on here. And I think it has to do...
Yeah, bear in mind that some of the most significant money has actually not been directed at vaccines, but backing a set of chemical compounds that are supposed to interfere with the cell's ability to respond to the virus.
Exactly.
If you look at the two compounds that have received the most money in this particular camp, both, and by the way, let me get the number on that experimental compound correct. It's EIDD 2801, and then remdesivir, which has gotten a lot of publicity. The EID 2801, that compound is actually being tested by Ridgeback Therapeutics. But what's happening with these is actually quite troublesome, because while it's important as a scientist to point out that many of these compounds are first tested in patients that are fairly poor off. So the FDA has a mechanism where they allow people to test the new compounds that are coming out on people who are potentially unlikely to survive anyhow. So I need to make sure that that caveat is very clear. But ironically, if you look at the compounds that are currently being promoted over and above the very well-established work that was done on SARS and coronavirus response to chloroquine back in 2013, if you look at what's going on right now with the two therapeutic compounds that are being promoted, it's actually quite important to realize that the side effects that have already been published on these include multi-system organ failure, kidney disorders, liver disorders, and a whole host of other things. In one study, an estimate of close to 40% mortality for the actual therapeutic compound. Now, like I said at the beginning, it's important to realize that the patients in which these compounds were first tested were already well on their way out. So I don't want to jump on the bandwagon and say it was the compound that killed them. But what I am saying very clearly is that from a safety and efficacy standpoint, you will inevitably encounter, if you look at the historical clinical trials, either at Ridgeback or at Gilead, some not so beautiful side effects that are well documented and far exceed, in terms of frequency, the side effects that have been used to suppress chloroquine and other things. I'm not advocating for one or the other. What I'm saying is that it is unconscious that we are being told that somehow or another we have these miracle cures that are part and parcel of the reopening of America by people who illegally lied and manipulated the facts, illegally practiced a violation of the Constitution in illegally pursuing and defending patents, illegally participated in antitrust violations where they colluded with corporations, and illegally promoted a fear-mongering tactic in violation of the Patriot Act. The fact of the matter is all these things together all lead to the absolute illegality of every governor and every federal action that has been taken to close down this country. There has been not a shred of scientific evidence to justify any of the actions taken, and we are being told to ignore that fact.
Exactly. I mean, it's really an insane thing that we're having to witness here. And we know that big pharma is not about curing anything. It's not about doing anything but making money. Their own CEOs will tell you that. You know, they're interested in shareholder profit. They are not interested in humanity as a whole. They don't have any altruistic intentions whatsoever. They're about making profit. So for them to come out with a vaccine, which is going to load up a body, stop down immune system, force a body into some type of disease state, which will then require some of their other pharmaceutical petrochemical drugs to then, treat the side effects of the vaccine, which will then in turn create more side effects from the drugs that they give you for those side effects. And it spirals on and on and on. This is big business. This is huge business. And this is really where they're coming from. And this fits very nicely into this whole transhumanist agenda of moving away from nature, moving away from God's creation into a technocracy, a system of technology that they think will, somehow advance humanity, when in fact it's really a absolute control system disguised as such.
Well, and I commented in a recent interview that I think that we're letting one very large set of actors go somewhat unnoticed, far in excess of the amount of money that has gone into the pharmaceutical response to COVID-19. Far more money has gone into data sciences companies who are monitoring the activities of average Americans.
You betcha.
And it is horrific to see the size and the scale of information scraping and surveillance, which is being funded with several orders of magnitude more money to actually surveil the compliance and the acquiescence of the population.
And hence the simulation we're undergoing now as a great measuring tool for
Absolutely.
that. Yeah, and we see that for sure. These people are just evil, pure and simple. We can, this is the battle of good and evil. I don't care what anybody says. That's what it boils down to in a spiritual sense. And that's really, we are spiritual beings. We're going to take a short pause right here. You're listening to Inside the Matrix with Dr. David Martin. We'll be back in just a little bit.
This is Inside the Matrix, hosted by Jimmy Brent.
Who are we talking about?
Jimmy Brent. Live every Sunday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It is worldwide.
Broadcasting from an undisclosed location deep within the neon capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. For more information on the host and the show, please visit InsideTheMatrix.org. That's InsideTheMatrix.org. It's time to break the chains of manipulated consciousness and claim our true nature as creative divine beings. Inside the Matrix. Inside the Matrix.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
An incident was about to take place that would shake the foundations of the civilized world.
It is time to open your mind. Time to discover your divine self as we navigate this holographic matrix together. Strap in, Cosmic Family, as we slide through this wormhole of cosmic information together in search of the truth. The truth.
You can't handle the truth.
It's time to go inside the matrix.
Inside the Matrix.
With your host, Jimmy Brent.
All right, welcome back, everybody. In case you're just joining us, we're here today with our special guest, Dr. David Martin, and we're discussing, kind of where we're at in the world today. And as I started to say before the break, I have felt for a long, long time, and I've been looking at these things for probably 30 years. There is a type of asymmetrical war being waged against humanity. Now, there's always up for debate as to who is waging this war and what they actually are. I have my doubts that they are human or fully human. But anyway, if you look at what's happened in our world, we're being blasted with chemtrails, aluminum, nano-aluminum, barium, strontium, various other things that we don't even know what they are, nanoparticles, smart dust. We're being attacked chemically through glyphosate in our food supply, through fluoride in our water. We're being bombarded constantly with electromagnetic frequencies at very high levels, which have proven, to cause cancer and many other side effects, and particularly nasty against children because their human biology isn't as protective as adults. So there are many of these so-called elite type, very wealthy people in the world who are of the mindset of eugenics. And by that, I mean they feel they need to pare down or cull the herd, reduce the population of the world down to a more manageable size as outlined in the Georgia Guidestones. And one cannot look at our situation and not think about that this is in fact what's going on. There is going to be many people, who will die of many of these different technologies that are being utilized against us. Now, it's the slow kill method. Although they would have loved to have seen a bunch of millions of people die from this, I'm sure, and that probably was the intent at the beginning. It seems rather dire, and I've talked about this subject many times before, but our only hope, and hope is not really a good word because it distracts us from what we need to do. Our greatest saving grace will be for us to become aware of the game and to stand up to it and refuse to cooperate. What do you think, David?
I think that the current exercise is very clearly focused on making sure that it is easy to find who is compliant and who isn't. There are individuals who have become quite hostile towards anyone questioning the official story. There are family members, there are friendships, there are all sorts of rifts that are opening up. And this is a playbook, as you can recall, that is not dissimilar to the playbook that happened in 2016, when significant amount of polarization was being essentially manufactured so that people would get themselves very much whipped into frenzies around particular dogmatic positions. And those covered race, they covered immigration, they covered the 99%, 1%, pick your topic. People were placed into these polarities. And I think that one of the things that we need to examine is that I think once again, we're being played as a collective. And what's percolating through that from an intelligence standpoint, and by intelligence, I mean intelligence gathering, is who is willing to, dislike their friend, who is willing to animate in anger against their family member, who is willing to engage in hostility, and who is not playing by the rules, who's having this kind of conversation. And I think what has been happening over the last, certainly 4 to 5 years more explicitly, but it's been happening for many years, ever since the NSA was really established for looking at internal threats, allegedly, is that we've progressively been placed in time after time scenarios in which the opportunity to out yourself as the hybrid that can be controlled versus the wild type that must be controlled is something that's playing out. And I think we're having that happen now in a more aggressive fashion. But, don't forget that what Cambridge Analytica and others did in the 2016 election cycle is playing out again. We are in the middle of the same story.
Yeah, I agree that's what's going on. They are definitely using this simulation to measure our response and to then ascertain their position as far as how easily they can control people in the world, who they can control, who they can't. They've probably got pretty accurate numbers of who are the divergent ones and who are the basically the ones that will just roll over and do anything that they're told, that are unable to think for themselves, that are unable to be human beings in the strictest sense of being a divine spark of God, a spiritual being that's actually realized and raised their consciousness to the point where they understand who they are. And I know that for some people that may sound crazy, but that definitely plays into this. It's, what is your state of awareness? How do you see this thing? Do you only see it from a mainstream media point of view where they're telling you need to be afraid, you need to be distrustful of people around you because they may give you some bizarre disease that you're going to die from? It's this type of hysteria is really it's really showing off, who's who and who isn't in a very telling way.
Well, and that's where I think our capacity as, liberated human beings to have open dialogue, to have respectful discourse and respectful even disagreement is probably one of the most patriotic things you can do right now.
Absolutely.
It is not inaccessible for each one of us not to fall for the game.
Yeah, and your point is well taken. We must maintain an open mind because a closed mind is not going to learn anything. A closed mind is not going to grow. I say that all the time. Those of you who have been listening to the show is like, are you going to say that again? Yeah, I say it all the time because it's so important to understand. And most of our listeners do understand that. They fully get that, and they understand what's going on. But we have a responsibility, those of us who are able to see what's going on here. And that's not to say that we have all the answers. I know I don't, and I'm sure David would agree. He doesn't know everything that's going on. But we do have a certain sense of what is happening. And for people that are curious, always share with them. Open up a dialogue if they're willing to talk. If people are broadsiding you and just hitting you with parroted talking points from the mainstream news, don't waste your time because you're just not going to get anywhere with people like that because they're in a state of panic and fear. And from a state of fear, people just simply cannot be rational. They cannot reason out things. But when you encounter somebody that say, hey, what do you think about this? Or what's your take on this? Absolutely, share with them. And one thing that came up with this Event 201 that was sponsored by Johns Hopkins and Bill Gates Foundation and all these other people, where they basically did a game theory simulation of what they're doing now back in October of 2019. One thing that they really discovered was that they had to flood the zone. That's what they called it. Flood the zone with their data, flood the zone with their talking points, flood the zone with their propaganda. Well, we need to flood the zone against what they're doing. We need to speak up when we need to call BS on when they're spouting a bunch of BS. I found it fascinating today to see that people were recognizing the CDC actually backed down drastically on the reported deaths of this so-called COVID-19. It was from 60,000 to 37,000. Oops. How did we get that wrong? What happened? Now, I bet you that mainstream media is not going to make a big deal out of that. It would be amazing to me if they even mention it, because that goes against their whole theory and their whole desire of being, trying to keep that propaganda line going. They want us to be in total fear, and because fear brings about compliance to most people. So anyway, it's crazy, people. It's absolutely crazy. And I know some of you out there have some questions for our guest, and please put them in the chat. We'd be happy to engage with those and have a discussion. If you want to call in, you can do that as well. But this incredible overreach is something that we just can't let go. We can't just let it happen and not stand up. So like I said earlier, I'm always very excited to see that people are standing up and that some of our sheriffs are awake and aware enough to stand up for us, because they literally are our last line of defense against tyranny. Our founding fathers were aware of this. They knew very well that this type of thing could happen. And that's why they put in a lot of the safeguards that are being ignored now. It's incredible that although police and military and politicians, they take an oath to uphold the Constitution. But I bet you if you tested a lot of them on it and said, hey, okay, does each amendment, give us a short synopsis of each amendment in the Constitution and tell us what it actually means in your words. I'll bet you 95 to 98% of them couldn't even come close. So they've taken an oath to something that they're really, really not even aware of what it is. And if they were, they certainly wouldn't be behaving the way they are. Good.
And to your point, I think it's important to realize that as citizens, one of the greatest tragedies is we have made all sorts of references to laws and to the Constitution and what people should and shouldn't do. And it is absolutely staggering to realize, to your point, that not only would people who've sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution not know what it is, but tragically, an enormous number of American citizens and professionals right through the legal community are absolutely unaware of the law and how it is implemented.
Yes. It's almost like, it's the short memory syndrome, where it's like, if this is being talked about, or this law or that law is being talked about, then it's uppermost in everybody's mind. And of course they're up to speed on it. And of course they understand it. But I know from having worked for many attorneys over the years in doing accounting for many of them, they really have little or no understanding of the Constitution because they don't encounter it. When they go into a courtroom,
Correct.
They're not discussing the constitutional issues whatsoever. It doesn't even enter their frame of reference for any of that stuff. So we've digressed so far from where we started out. And, if you really know history, we only had a legitimate republic for a very short period of time. And basically the Revolutionary War was ended because they agreed to pay the king. So it's a terrible situation we find ourselves in. And as Thomas Jefferson said, we gave you a republic if you can keep it. And there's always been these outside forces who are there. Well, you know what? The people are kind of stupid. We're just going to go ahead and jump in. We're going to create these central banks. You know, a lot of our angst and a lot of our problems go back to, actually to 1910 when the Jekyll Island meeting occurred. And many of you will remember when I had G. Edward Griffin on here, the author of that outstanding book, The Creature from Jekyll Island. In 1910, they plotted to install their central bank system. And in 1913, Congress sold us out, along with our coward president, Woodrow Wilson. And that really began the first heavy nail in our coffin as freedom-loving people, because we gave away control of our money system to a private group of individuals. And they were able to buy enough politicians to make it happen. So ever since then, they've funded both sides of every world war. They've been behind the financial crises that have happened, like the 1929 stock market crash and all the ones since then. They are behind this now. It's the same group of people and their progeny, which are carrying forward this whole system of keeping a sort of controlled chaos happening at all times, keeping people in a state of fear so that they can get exactly what they want and maintain this system of control that they have.
Well, and I think, Jimmy, one of the things that I would like to point out for your listeners is that I have long advocated in my film Future Dreaming, which viewers can see on YouTube or on the davidmartin.world site. Yeah, and that was excellent. I've long advocated that it would be really great for people to really reflect on how the individual decisions that we make, the daily decisions we make about what we consume, how we consume, how we engage. Do we extend ourselves beyond our means? Do we rely on banks to own our houses and to own our need to be employed because our credit card bills are out of control? I don't advocate for a disengagement from a system, but I do advocate for a conscious engagement. And the difference is that if you really don't play the game, which is overextend credit, live past your means, be constantly indentured, if you don't play the game doesn't work anymore. 2008 worked because we turned our houses into ATMs. And rather than pretending that real estate was really real estate anymore, banks decided to let you refinance your home and do all sorts of other things. And what we did was we wiped out the idea that while banks may play a role in society, if we let them, they will take the role. And I think that each individual needs to examine the degree to which, as much as these moments are painful, we do have the ability on daily choices to say, you know what, that's going to be a purchase I make when I can pay it off, or that's going to be a purchase I make only when I've got the funds to do it. Every time that decision is made, every single instance that decision is made, the incumbency loses your life force, because as long as you are indentured to financial institutions, as long as you are indentured to someone else, you are in fact very much sending your life force into their system. And the minute you can step away, even at a little bit, I'm not saying, go to the extreme. If you want to go to the extreme, go to the extreme, but I'm not advocating for extremes. I'm advocating for just ratcheting down your participation. Because the more we ratchet down our participation, the more we say we're not playing the game of surrogating 30 to 40 years of our life force or more to keep chasing our ability to feed the coffers of individuals who do not have our best interest anywhere, even in their radar. Forget it, the best interest at heart. They're not even thinking about best interest. They're thinking about how to indenture people. And I think that if you look at what's happening, it's not surprising that we're being told right now that we will not go back to normal. We cannot go back to normal until we have another paymaster, right? It's going to be the pharmaceutical, it's going to be the industrial chemical, it's going to be some other paymaster. And it's time for all of us to say, no, we're not playing the game.
I agree with you. That is collectively what needs to happen. When you consider, as you said before, as you said earlier, there's a very small group of people that are pulling this off. However, they have got the force behind them, what I call the hammer of the police and the military. So, you don't want to comply, you don't want to social distance, you want to try and open up your business so that your family doesn't starve and you survive in the world. Well, guess what? We're going to send the goons after you. We're going to arrest you. We're going to take you down. If you resist, we may beat you up. We may shoot you. It's incredible that it's gotten to this point, but we outnumber these people. Even the police. And I'm not saying to fight the police, because that's the last thing you want to do, because they are equipped to take you out quickly and expeditiously. I'm not saying that at all, and I would never advocate violence. Don't remember.
Yeah, most people don't remember though that in memory, not in the not distant past, but if you go back and you look at John D. Rockefeller Jr. and the role that he played in workers' suppression and in the Ludlow massacre and very famous moments where the uprisings of individuals were suppressed. The problem remained that out of each one of those moments, what we did was we further polarized the surrogated nature of living, where we put our lives into the control of someone else. And if you think about the labor movement that came out of the period of really austere oppression of labor in the post-depression, pre-depression, and post-depression era, what you find is that we as a people have for some reason developed this reflex that we're going to still look to someone else to take care of us. There's going to be a someone else. And what I'm trying to advocate for, whether it is at the individual level, which is to say, other people have equipped individuals to say, not only can you say no to capricious orders of governors and mayors, you can do that because you have the power of the law on your side, and it does not take someone else's opinion. Remember that the cop or the sheriff that's coming to enforce... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, let's hold that thought, because we're up against the hard break once again. So we'll address that as soon as we get back. So please hold that thought. You're listening to Inside the Matrix with our special guest, David Martin. We'll be right back. Stick around with us, people. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to our final segment here with Dr. David Martin. We're discussing our current situation in the world, and it's crazy. Anyway, we were talking before the break of how about the topic that we outnumber these people by tremendous amounts, the ones that are infringing upon our rights and everything. And we do need to stand up for ourselves. We first have to know what our rights are. We've been dumbed down in our school systems. The Constitution is barely referred to in any kind of education, even for attorneys. They don't focus on that. Being a constitutional attorney is something that maybe a professor does, but you certainly would not apply those things in 99% of court cases, right, David?
Well, yeah, and I think that's where the power that people do have is the power of information. The average person who encounters a legal officer or a court officer has the ability, if they choose to do so, to be more educated and equipped about the Constitution than in all likelihood the person that they're encountering. to your earlier point, people make oaths to things that they've never read. They swear allegiance to things that they've never considered. And in the case of this particular situation, the information that I put out last Monday and Tuesday, the stuff on David Martin World on YouTube, was actually first step down the pathway of informing people how to encounter the opposition that they may find from courts or law enforcement. And It turns out that, and I'm delighted to report that out of the nearly 300,000 people who encountered that material, I have heard directly from about 3,000 people, so 1%, 3,000 people, who have sent that information to their mayors, to their governors, to their attorneys general, to their congressmen and women, to their senators. And the fact of the matter is, to your point, we already outnumber in our response the number of people who are behind the collusion that's going on right now. The fact is that they have been spending the last 17 years getting ready for this event, and we've had the last 7 weeks trying to respond. So the fact that it's going to take a little bit of time to ramp up the response is, in fact, just the challenge of building the inertia. But the fact is, I was thrilled to see that I have over 3,000 individuals who have not only taken the information and downloaded it, but I have community organizations across the country. I have people who are business owners and chambers of commerce who have not only taken the information, but they're printing it and putting it on their storefronts and reopening their businesses. And the fact of the matter is, you can equip yourself to be more informed than the law enforcement officer that shows up at your door.
Yeah, I love that. That's absolutely wonderful. And the fact that you did that is such a fantastic service to the people. And so tell people where they can find, if they haven't seen your YouTube, because you have all of those links in the description where people can download your template letter. I know I sent off at least a dozen of them. I wrote to everybody. I wrote to the mayor, the governor, the state representatives, you name it. I went with it, just like you're talking about. A lot of people have done that, and it's wonderful. So let people know where they can find your website and your YouTube channel.
Well, the good news is if you go to davidmartin.world, you can get to everything. But if you want a shortcut to get to the material, if you go to David Martin World on YouTube, click the Show More under each one of the last 3 videos, and you'll get all the references. And for the video that was dated April the 27th, so this last Monday's video, if you click on that one, you will get the template letters and you'll get the entire set of information necessary to inform yourself about why you have a basis to establish the illegality of the governor's executive orders in your state and the basis around which you can argue that that executive order cannot and does not have the teeth of law because it violates the Constitution, and it is the result of a criminal conspiracy that is detailed very clearly in the materials under that April 27th video. So,
yeah, exactly. That's wonderful. And everybody should watch that video because David lays it out there very clearly and distinctly exactly what all that means. And so we do have the tools that we need to push back on this, and we're going to continue to do so. I'm seeing that a lot of state legislators are beginning to file lawsuits against the governors, and some of the areas are doing the same thing. And that's a wonderful thing. These are the things that we need to celebrate and we need to get excited about and support these people. If you see that your local mayor or one of your state representatives or state senators is bringing about an action to stand up for we the people, write them a letter and tell them how much you support them and how much you appreciate what they're doing, because that goes a long way with these people that are standing up for us. So we'll all support each other in standing up against this type of overreach. We'll do as much as we can as individuals as well. And I expect sort of a boomerang effect of this too, David. Months and weeks go by. I think a lot more people are going to jump on this and say, hey, wait a minute. As more data comes in, it's going to be blatantly obvious of what this whole operation was.
Well, and I hate to spoil the surprise, but this coming Monday, so tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to have the next installment where an enormous amount of additional co-conspirators and a lot more criminality is going to be talked about. All of this information, once again, is going to be put up on YouTube so people can get their hands on it and use it. Because the point is, this is not just to inform, this is to inform and act. This is about being a patriot, not just celebrating patriotism.
Exactly. And going back to Ben Franklin's quote of, we gave you a republic if you can keep it. The idea is you can keep it if you become involved. You can keep it if you educate yourself and understand what your rights are. And we have to do this ourselves because our school systems designed by these same people do not do that for us. So we have to take the responsibility. We have to be responsible people, humans, in this world to stand up for ourselves, and we outnumber them so greatly. And if we ever I used to say, back when we had all these active wars going, well, we still do it to an extent, but the humanity will have evolved when a government declares war on another nation, and the military of the first government, or the first government that declares war says, no, we're not going. And the people they declared war against, their military says, no, we're not going to invade them either. Self-defense is one thing and is justified, but to go out and invade another country for empire building or political gain, financial gain, or whatever is completely immoral and unacceptable. But it is an example of how a higher mind, a moral compass, will serve people once they've reached a point of understanding of who they are and what their responsibilities are. We are all responsible in a system like we have. The more responsible and moral a people are, the more free they can become. The more immoral people are, the more oppression they're going to face.
Well, and I think to your point, Jimmy, one of the things that we need to realize is that we were sold a bill of goods in the 1930s and 40s with what was called an American dream. The American dream, unfortunately, was the sucker punch of getting people addicted to consumption. And
exactly.
it was all about how much you had, and the concepts like Brooks Stevens' concept of planned obsolescence. Build things so that they break so that you buy more of them.
Right.
We were told that this was about chickens in pots and cars in garages. America is not about that. America is about an ideal of liberty. And liberty does not mean indenture yourself because you are too busy filling your pots with chickens and your garages with cars. And it's critical that we understand that if we're going to make a stand for the American ideal, that stand has to be made for American ideals, not for industrial ideals, because that's not the same thing. Right.
And I know George Carlin put it so well, and I love that guy. I miss him dearly. He said, the American dream, right? You have to, it's called the American dream because you literally have to be asleep to accept it.
Right.
I thought that was awesome.
Exactly.
So true. So true. And, okay, one other thing I wanted to ask you about, David, I'm not sure if you looked into this at all, but I think that the 5G technology has been rolled out fast and furious, and without any testing, without any safety safeguards whatsoever. And my understanding is that with these new frequencies, they can actually be tuned. These towers can be tuned to use different frequencies in ranges that are, whether it's accessing the internet or our cell phone systems can utilize. But there are some of these frequencies that are highly, highly dangerous and damaging to biology. And we know from what's come out that a lot of these places that the so-called virus erupted in and had all these massive deaths were at places that had already rolled out 5G, and the 60 gigahertz frequency is a millimeter wavelength, which inhibits your body's ability to absorb oxygen. Your hemoglobin is not able to absorb oxygen properly. And this kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about that strange pneumonia that was coming out. So a lot of people are making a connection between 5G and the symptoms that people are experiencing as this COVID-19 or whatever you want to call it.
One of the things that distinguishes my work, Jimmy, is I am very, very much committed to a clarification on the difference between the coincidence and co-occurrence of a thing and causality. And the reason I raise this issue is I've been intrigued with the 5G conversation in that 5G is actually not new. It's been around. It has been deployed far more widely than people think. And I think that we have to recall that the government has for a very long time sold safety to the companies that are willing to pay the highest price. Remember that the Center for Disease Control decided that DDT, and you remember DDT, the thing that killed the bald eagle and decimated species all over the world. Remember that CDC, the Center for Disease Control, was the one that said it was not only safe and effective, but they advocated using it in your home.
Sure, right? And just like cigarettes too, right?
And that same organization has for years suggested that glyphosate, which is the basis for Monsanto's Roundup, which is now obviously inside of the German conglomerate. But Roundup was supposed to be not only a core to the Green Revolution, but it was going to industrialize at scale agriculture to be, greening the world and making the world plentiful with food. That same organization said that glyphosate was safe. But that same organization also said that Bacillus thuringiensis, the bacteria that is used to genetically modify crops, was also safe, despite the fact that Bacillus thuringiensis, the bacterium which is used for genetically modified crops, was shown 100 years ago by the Japanese to cause a whole host of GI symptoms, most problematically things like leaky gut and other forms of bowel disorders. That data has been present for 100 years, but we still have BT crops, BT cotton, BT everything, and we do it so that we can genetically modify things to accommodate Monsanto's Roundup. Now, the reason I'm raising this issue is we have to wake up to the fact that safety has never, ever, ever trumped, in the U.S. government's experience, an industrial expediency that's paid for it. And it's high time we stop pretending that somehow or another a government agency or anybody else is going to certify something as safe, because safety has never been the issue. The issue has always been a risk calculus that says, on the one hand, we know somebody's going to get harmed. Are enough of them powerful enough that we need to worry about it? And like
exactly
5G, like Bacillus thuringiensis, like glyphosate, the answer, unfortunately, has been we as a human species have decided for some perverse reason that we have this beneficent organization called government that is somehow looking out for our safety. Nothing could be further from the truth. And so the reason I don't uniquely comment on 5G is because the fundamental problem is this illusion that somehow or another there is empirically determined safety as part of a mandate that the people are placing on the government. We have been had. And all you have to do is look at the CDC's DDT experience to absolutely give you 100% confidence that when they tell you, or when NIAID tells you that a vaccine or a therapy is safe and effective for coronavirus, I want you to think DDT. I want you to think about the other wonderful experiences we've had with what they've decided is safe and effective, and then wake up to the fact that if it doesn't have independent empirical testing, not government sanctioned, but independent empirical testing, then the likelihood that it is safe is near zero.
Yep. And let's talk about the CDC, and let's talk about the FDA. What are these organizations really? Because people think, oh, they're part of a government watchdog thing or thingy organization. My understanding is the CDC is a vaccine company itself that holds many patents and sells many vaccines. Is that your information as well?
Well, listen, the CDC owns an enormous number of patents on both vaccines and therapies. So they are certainly not a benevolent organization that's just out for the interest of the individual citizen. They are very much a commercial enterprise. But the issue, and I raised this in the antitrust part of my argument, is that they collude with selective parties. It's not an open thing, right? They have a thing called competitive grants, but those competitions are stacked decks. If you look at who's on the reviewing panel and who gets the money, giant surprise, it seems to be the same people.
The same folks,
and the problem we have is that while it is in fact, the Center for Disease Control is in fact a United States congressionally appropriated and established organization, the fact is, since its inception, it has been in bed with large industrial concerns. And still, to this day, if you go back and look at what happened with the COVID response, hundreds of millions of dollars flowed through NIH, through CDC, and through DARPA to a handful of companies, not to every company. It wasn't an open contest where the best can win. It was flowing funds specifically to people who supported the ideological and dogmatic positions of the CDC and the World Health Organization. And it was not flowing funds to companies that had alternatives that were not part of the cabal. So the fact is that this organization has not been and is not even committed to a modicum of decency when it comes to having an uncontested position with respect to their conflicts. They explicitly tell you what their conflicts are, and then they pour hundreds of millions of dollars into the pockets of the people that reinforce themselves. And by the way, you can guarantee that somewhere in the back or front or side of Anthony Fauci's mind is his very high-paid position when he leaves federal government employment, where he will be likely on the board of Gilead Sciences, or he'll be on the board of J&J's vaccine program, or he'll be on the board of some other industrial company, because we have the revolving door that says, I will put hundreds of millions of dollars into your pockets in exchange for my house in the Hamptons or my sailboat when I retire federal service.
Exactly. Yeah, and we see the same thing with the FDA and the pharmaceutical companies. Their board of directors are interchangeable. And, okay, translation for everybody out there, you cannot trust your government to do anything to protect you or help you. It is up to we the people to stand up for ourselves. And it's a sad realization when we come to that. It really is.
But let's turn it around a bit. And the fact is that this government, the government that is currently playing out at the bureaucratic level, isn't our government. It isn't ours because we walked away from our accountability as citizens to be active and engaged and involved. When things were going well, we didn't care. And suddenly we now care. And my advocacy is always care. Always be engaged, always be informed, always stay on top of things so you do not get caught surprised when these kinds of charades come along. This is a scam. This is a social engineering exercise. It is not a healthcare exercise. It has nothing to do with healthcare. In fact, if anything, it is antithetical to healthcare. We ultimately will see consolidation of regional and local hospitals by large corporations. We will see a host of chemical interventions. And at the end of the day, this has nothing to do with health. It's everything about, are we going to roll over again? And the answer here in Charlottesville, in the foothills, looking right now, I'm watching the moon rise over Monticello, where Thomas Jefferson penned the documents that we say we use as our organizing documents. I am the first person, and I will continue to be the first person leading the charge to say it's time for we, the people, to actually take responsibility for our complicity in not holding people accountable and change our behavior, starting with education.
Well said. And you've proven this. You have lived this. You have done this. You've stood up for people. You've stood up for what is right throughout your life, and we applaud you for that. We respect you for that. So I would say to everybody, look forward to David's YouTube video tomorrow and subscribe to his channel, David Martin World on YouTube. His website is davidmartin.world, so you can find links there as well. David, we thank you so much, for coming on today and sharing your wisdom with us and sharing your heart and your character. It's a wonderful thing to see, and we hope more people will take up the banner.
Wonderful, Jimmy. Thank you for having me. And to all of your listeners, thank you for the time.
All right, great. And, I hate to even bring this up to everybody, but, we're all struggling right here. And if you can donate to the show to try and keep it going, we'd really appreciate it. There's a donate button on the homepage, and you could designate which show it will go to. Until next time, you've been listening to Inside the Matrix. Thank you, everybody, and hang in there. We will prevail. Till next week. Goodbye.
This is Inside the Matrix, hosted by Jimmy Brent.
Who are we talking about?
Jimmy Brent. Live every Sunday, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It is worldwide.
Broadcasting from an undisclosed location deep within the neon capital of the world, Las Vegas, Nevada. For more information on the host and the show, please visit InsideTheMatrix.org. That's InsideTheMatrix.org. It's time to break the chains of manipulated consciousness and claim our true nature as creative, divine beings. Inside the Matrix. Inside the Matrix.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.